softly today.
Alessandro De Luca had built his empire on silence. Silence after gunshots. Silence after betrayal. Silence after grief. The city of Ravello feared him not because he was loud or cruel, but because he was precise. His word ended wars. His nod decided who lived comfortably and who vanished without a trace. Men twice his size lowered their eyes when he entered a room. Women admired him from a distance, knowing better than to step too close. At 36, Alessandro had everything power could offer, and nothing it couldn't replace. His mansion sat high above the city, all marble floors and iron gates, guarded like a fortress. Inside it felt hollow, cold, the kind of place where footsteps echoed too loudly and sleep came in short, restless hours. That was the house Elena Rossi walked into. She arrived with a single suitcase and a quiet determination that came from losing everything once already. Her grandmother, her only family, had died months earlier, leaving Elena with debts she couldn't pay and a future she couldn't see. When the agency offered work at a private estate, she didn't ask questions. She only nodded. On her first day, the head housekeeper pulled her aside. "This house has rules," the woman said firmly. "You don't wander. You don't listen, and you never, ever speak to the master unless he speaks first."
Elena nodded.
She was good at being invisible. At first, Alessandro barely noticed her. New staff came and went often. Some quit out of fear, others were dismissed for curiosity. Elena was different. She worked quietly, efficiently, leaving no trace behind. She didn't stare. She didn't gossip. She didn't tremble when armed men walked past her. The first time Alessandro truly saw her was late one evening. He stood on the balcony outside his study, cigarette unlit between his fingers, when he noticed someone in the garden below. Elena sat on a stone bench, reading under a dim lamp. The world around her seemed softer somehow, like she carried her own calm. He watched longer than he meant to. Something about her presence disturbed him, not with fear, but with a strange ache he couldn't name. Their first interaction happened by accident. Elena spilled wine in the dining hall while cleaning. The glass shattered loudly, echoing like a gunshot. She froze, heart pounding, knowing he was there. Alessandro looked up slowly. "I'm sorry," she said softly, eyes lowered. He studied her face, expecting panic, excuses, tears. Instead, he saw sincerity. "Leave it," he said. She blinked in surprise but obeyed. When she looked up briefly to thank him, their eyes met. That night, Alessandro didn't sleep. From then on, small moments began to pile up. Elena left tea by his door at night. Opened windows he hadn't realized were always shut. Played soft music while cleaning. Music that drifted into his study and settled into places long untouched. One night, he followed the sound of a piano. Elena sat in an old room no one used anymore, fingers trembling slightly as she played. The melody was imperfect but full of feeling. Alessandro stood in the doorway, unseen, listening as something inside him cracked open. "You play like someone who remembers happiness," he said quietly. She startled, standing quickly. "I'm sorry, I didn't know." "You didn't break any rules," he said. "Continue." From that night on, their conversations began. Careful, late-night exchanges over tea, fragments of lives revealed without names or details. Elena learned he didn't sleep well. Alessandro learned she feared storms. They almost kissed once, during a blackout, candlelight flickering between them, breath mingling in the dark. But Elena stepped back. "This is dangerous," she whispered. "Yes," he agreed, "but so is living without it." Love crept in anyway, slow, uninvited, undeniable. The underworld noticed. Whispers spread that Alessandro had grown soft, that he protected someone, that he walked a woman home himself, that his attention wandered. Then Valentina Moretti returned. She was fire-dressed in silk, a woman from Alessandro's past, once promised to him for alliance, now armed with jealousy and ambition. She made sure Elena saw her kiss Alessandro's cheek, heard her laughter, felt small beside her elegance. Fear finally won. Elena tried to leave. "I don't belong in your world," she said, tears trembling in her voice. "You belong with me," Alessandro replied, his voice breaking for the first time in front of anyone. She stayed. Their love was not gentle, it was desperate, healing, consuming. For the first time, Alessandro imagined a future that didn't end in blood. Then Elena was taken. A rival faction kidnapped her, using her as leverage to drag Alessandro back into the life he was trying to escape. The city burned as he hunted them down. He found her alive, shaken, but unbroken. "I knew you'd come," she whispered into his chest. But the damage was done. Danger would never stop coming. When Elena discovered she was pregnant, joy and terror collided. Alessandro knew the truth immediately. As long as he lived openly, they would never be safe. So he made a choice. The explosion that night shook Ravello to its core. Alessandro De Luca was declared dead. His car destroyed, his body unrecognizable. The empire fractured. Enemies retreated. Elena screamed until her throat tore. She mourned him while carrying his child, unaware his sacrifice was deliberate. She left the city, changed her name, gave birth to a son she named Luca, who inherited his father's eyes and his mother's gentleness. Years passed. Alessandro lived in shadows, watching from afar, punishing himself with distance. Every birthday missed carved deeper scars than any knife ever had. 6 years later, fate intervened. A small cafe, a dropped cup, a familiar voice saying her name.
Elena.
She turned, and the world shattered. Anger, grief, love, and betrayal collided. Tears were shed. Truth spilled. When Luca looked at Alessandro and asked, "Are you my papa?" Alessandro fell to his knees. Healing came slowly. Alessandro learned how to be ordinary. Elena learned how to forgive. Luca learned that even lost people could come home. They faced one final threat together, and ended it not with fear but unity. They married quietly by the sea. No guards, no guns, just love. Years later, Alessandro would sit on that same shore, Elena beside him, Luca laughing nearby, and realize the truth. He had ruled an empire once. But love was the greatest power he had ever known. Peace did not arrive all at once. Even after the wedding, even after the vows whispered by the sea, Alessandro De Luca still lived with the instinct to look over his shoulder. Years of survival could not be unlearned in months. Elena noticed it in the way he positioned himself in rooms, how his eyes mapped exits without thought, how his hands sometimes twitched when strangers raised their voices. But she did not ask him to forget who he was. She asked him to stay. They settled in a quiet coastal town far from Ravello, where the air smelled of salt and mornings came gently. Alessandro bought a small business by the docks, legitimate, modest, almost laughably normal. He wore simple clothes now.
No tailored suits. No guards.
At first, people only saw a reserved man with a scarred past and a beautiful wife who smiled like she had survived something heavy. Luca thrived there. He was curious, stubborn, endlessly observant. He asked questions that made Alessandro pause and choose his words carefully. "Why don't you like loud noises, Papa?" "Because I've heard too many that meant people didn't come home." Luca accepted that answer quietly. At night, when Luca slept, Elena sometimes lay awake beside Alessandro, tracing the scars on his chest like a map of all the lives he had lived before her. "Do you regret it?" she asked once. "Which part?" "Everything before us." Alessandro thought carefully. "I regret who I hurt," he said. "But if I hadn't walked through hell, I wouldn't have recognized heaven when I found you." She kissed him then, slow, grounding. Still, the past did not stay buried. A journalist published another piece months later, more detailed, more dangerous. It spoke of the ghost of Ravello's former king, of rumors that Alessandro De Luca had survived. Names resurfaced. Old alliances stirred. Elena felt it before Alessandro told her. They're getting closer, he admitted one night. Not with guns. With questions. Fear flickered in her eyes. Not for herself, but for Luca. We won't run again, she said firmly. Running gave them power once. That was when Elena truly stepped into her strength. She began organizing community programs, helping women who arrived in town broken and desperate, much like she once had. Some had escaped abusive homes. Others carried secrets they were terrified would catch up to them. Elena listened without judgment. She protected without demanding loyalty. People started calling her La Calma, the calm. Alessandro watched her build something beautiful from ashes and felt a different kind of pride, one untouched by ego. Then Valentina returned. Not in silk this time, in shadows. She approached Alessandro alone one evening near the docks. Older but no less sharp, bitterness carved deep into her beauty. You chose a quiet life, she said. How poetic. You shouldn't be here, he replied evenly. I came to warn you, she said. The families aren't satisfied. They want a symbol, either your head or your son. Alessandro's blood ran cold. He didn't hesitate. That night he told Elena everything. For the first time she didn't cry. We end this, she said calmly. Not with fear, with truth. Together they made a decision neither would have dared years ago. Alessandro stepped into the light. He testified carefully, selectively, exposing the rot of the underworld while shielding innocents who would be punished for speaking. He didn't seek redemption in the eyes of the law. He sought finality. Threats followed. Attempts. Fear returned. But this time he wasn't alone. Elena stood beside him in every courtroom appearance. Luca held his hand, small fingers wrapped tightly around scars earned long before he was born. When it was over, the empire that once fed on Alessandro collapsed under its own weight. Some nights were still hard. Alessandro woke shaking from dreams of fire and blood. Elena held him until the tremors passed. Some mornings, Elena felt the old fear creep back, the instinct to disappear. But love had taught them endurance. Years passed. Luca grew taller, stronger, wiser. He knew his father's past, not in detail but in truth. He understood that love was a choice made every day, especially after darkness. On their 20th anniversary, Alessandro took Elena back to Ravello for the first time. They stood on the same balcony where he had once watched a quiet girl read in the garden below. I was already lost then, he said softly. I just didn't know I was waiting for you. Elena smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. And I didn't know a house I cleaned would become the place I saved a soul. As the sun dipped below the city, Alessandro realized something profound. He had died once to protect love. He had lived again to deserve it. And this time, this life, he would never walk away. Time softened the sharpest edges of Alessandro's past, but it never erased them. Luca was 15 when Alessandro first realized the fear had changed shape. It was no longer fear of being hunted. It was fear of being inherited. Luca had grown tall, too fast. His voice was deeper now, his eyes sharper. He noticed things. He remembered details. And sometimes, Alessandro caught him watching the world with the same calculating stillness he once carried. You don't smile when you think? Alessandro said one evening as they walked along the docks. Luca shrugged. I'm just paying attention. That answer haunted him. Elena noticed it too. But she didn't panic. She never did. Luca isn't you, she said gently when Alessandro voiced his worries. He knows love first. That already changes everything. Still, Alessandro began spending more time with his son, teaching him how to repair boats, how to negotiate prices honestly, how to walk away when pride tempted him to stay. Strength, Alessandro told him once, is knowing when not to dominate. Luca listened, but the world tested him anyway. At 17, Luca was approached by men who didn't know, or pretended not to know, who his father once was. They spoke of money, shortcuts, power. They saw potential, hunger. When Luca told Elena, she held him and said nothing. When he told Alessandro, the silence lasted longer. I won't tell you what to choose, Alessandro finally said. But I will tell you what it costs. He showed Luca the scars, spoke of the nights he couldn't sleep, of the people he lost, of the moment he chose death so love could live. I ruled an empire, he said quietly, and I would trade it all again just to sit at a table with you. Luca didn't answer immediately. He didn't need to. He never met those men again. Life moved forward, not dramatically, not loudly. Elena's community home expanded. Women came and went, healed and hopeful. She became a quiet force, respected without intimidation. Alessandro watched her command rooms with kindness and realized she was the strongest person he had ever known. Years later, when Luca left for university, the house felt too quiet again. Alessandro found himself standing on the balcony at night, the sea stretching endlessly below, just like it had years ago. Elena joined him, slipping her hand into his. "You're thinking again," she said. "I spent my life afraid of leaving a mark," he admitted. "Now I'm afraid of letting go." She smiled softly. "That's what fathers do." When Luca returned for holidays, he brought stories, questions, dreams. He studied law, then community development. He wanted to build systems, not control them. "I want to fix things," he said. "The way you did, but without the blood." Alessandro's eyes burned with quiet pride. As the years passed, Alessandro's hair silvered at the temples. His scars ached more in the cold. He moved slower but lighter. The weight of the past no longer crushed him. One evening, long after Luca had built a life of his own, Alessandro collapsed quietly at home. It wasn't dramatic. No violence. No enemies. Just a tired heart that had fought long enough. Elena held his hand in the hospital, just as she had held him through nightmares decades before. "I'm not afraid," he whispered. "I lived." "You loved," she corrected. He smiled. When Alessandro de Luca died, there were no headlines. Just a man laid to rest by the sea. Luca spoke at the memorial. "My father was feared once," he said. "But the man I knew chose love every day. That choice saved us." Elena stood quietly, grief heavy but peaceful. Years later, she still walked the shoreline every morning. Sometimes, she imagined him beside her, silent, watchful, finally at peace. She had entered his life as a house help. She had left it as the woman who changed a destiny. And somewhere, in the quiet beyond fear and power, Alessandro de Luca rested knowing this. His empire had fallen, but his love had endured. After Alessandro's death, the sea felt louder. Elena noticed it on the first morning she woke alone, the way the waves crashed with insistence, as if trying to remind her that the world did not pause for grief. She sat at the edge of the bed for a long time, one hand pressed to the empty space where Alessandro had always slept, steady and warm. She did not cry immediately. Grief, she had learned, was patient. The town mourned quietly, not because they feared Alessandro de Luca, but because they respected the man he became. Fishermen closed early that day. Women from the community home lit candles. Luca stood tall beside his mother, holding her hand when the weight of memory bent her shoulders. In the weeks that followed, Elena learned how to live with absence. She kept Alessandro's routines alive, not because she couldn't let go, but because love deserved remembrance. She still brewed coffee the way he liked it, strong and bitter. Still walked the shoreline at dusk. Still talked to him in the quiet moments, as if silence itself carried answers. Sometimes she laughed at memories. Sometimes she broke. And sometimes she felt him everywhere. Luca stayed longer than planned. He moved through the house slowly, touching doorframes, shelves, the old chair Alessandro had repaired with his own hands years earlier. "I didn't realize how much of him lived here," Luca said one evening. "He built this life brick by brick," Elena replied softly. "Not with power, but with choice." When Luca returned to his life, he carried his father with him, not as a shadow, but as a compass. He became known for his integrity, for refusing shortcuts, for standing between systems and the people they tried to crush. Those who learned his full history later were often shocked. "You're his son?" they would ask. Luca would nod calmly, And I'm not afraid of who he was, he'd say, because I know who he chose to become. Years passed. Elena grew older with grace. Her hair silvered, her steps slowed, but her presence remained steady, grounding. The community home expanded into a foundation. Women came to her not just for shelter, but for hope. Sometimes they asked her how she had survived loving a dangerous man. Elena always answered the same way. I didn't love his darkness, she said. I loved the man brave enough to walk out of it. On the 20th anniversary of Alessandro's death, Luca returned home with his own family. Children ran along the shoreline, laughter filling the space where silence once ruled. Elena sat on a bench, wrapped in a light shawl, watching the sea. Luca sat beside her. Do you think he'd be proud? He asked quietly. Elena smiled, eyes fixed on the horizon. He already was, she said. The moment you chose kindness. That night, Elena dreamed of Alessandro for the first time in years. He stood by the sea, younger, unscarred, peaceful. You did well, he told her. So did you, she replied. When Elena passed, years later, it was just as quietly as Alessandro had. No fear, no unfinished business, just a life fully lived. They buried her beside him, overlooking the water that had witnessed the beginning and the end of their love. On the headstone, Luca had one line engraved. He ruled an empire once. She taught him how to leave it. Together they chose love. And so the story ended, not with violence, not with power, but with the truth Alessandro de Luca had learned too late to rule by, but just in time to live by. Love is the only legacy that survives silence. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more videos.